Okay, so continuing on, so we've talked about this code that's been automatically generated by IntelliJ. Let's start making some changes to it now. So first things first, let's change the title. But before I do that, let's just run it again as a recap. You can see it's a very basic little interface there. It's got Hello World at the top. So to change the title, you probably guessed how to do that. We come back here onto line 14, and let's change that to Hello JavaFX. JavaFX. Make that change and run it again. And obviously now the title of the window has now been changed to Hello JavaFX. But let's make another change. Let's actually get it to say welcome to JavaFX within the window instead of changing the title. Now there's two ways to go about this. We can use code in the Java code itself, or we can change the FXml file. So we're going to show you both ways, but let's change the application so that it doesn't use the XML file at all. Instead, we'll do everything through code, and then later on we'll go back and look at the FXml. So first we're going to do is we're going to comment out the load on line 13 because we're not going to be using the sample.fxml. So I'm just going to comment that out. And then we need to add the code manually that's going to create this grid pane node, and it can be very useful for you to learn how to do this this way as well, learning it manually and then also learning to use the FXml file. So what we're going to do is type in what is the equivalent code to what was in the FXml file. So I'm going to type grid pane, accept the import, root equals new grid pane like so. Then we're going to do root dot set alignment, and we're going to choose POS dot, and we're going to use center like so. Then we're going to set our VGAP and HGAP, so it's root dot set VGAP 10 and root dot set horizontal gap, vertical and horizontal gap. And again, in case you're wondering what am I doing here, looking back at the sample FXml file, the code I'm typing is effectively the replacement for this, for setting the alignment to center, the horizontal gap to 10 and the vertical gap to 10. So we're doing that in code here on lines 18 through 20. So I've done that manually, and consequently now we've got a root object, so the rest there should work. So before we actually make a change and put some text in the window, we should be able to run this and get the same result we had when we had this sample.fxml file. So if we run that, you can see we've still got our window. So we're now constructing that window, creating it without the FXml file. And just incidentally, I didn't really say there what HGAP and VGAP was. You probably guessed it. It's the horizontal gap between columns in the grid. So that's what HGAP is, and VGAP is the vertical gap between rows in a grid. And we've set them both to 10 because that's what was set in the sample.fxml for now. But you could certainly experiment with different values if you wanted to. And the alignment itself determines where the grid will actually sit within the grid pane's width and height. And the set alignment, so we're using pos.center, which is again is the equivalent of that alignment command we used that I showed you earlier from the sample.fxml. So now that we've got the same basis to what we had before I commented out the sample.fxml file, let's now add to that. So what I'm going to do is add some code to add a label. So to do that, what I'm going to do is come down to here, and before the primary stage.show, I'm going to start typing the code in there. So let's type label. Noticing that's a javafx.scene.control, and we're going to call this greeting. I'll accept that import. We're using the javafx.scene as the import. Press enter. The greeting, we'll set that equal to a new label. New label. We'll put welcome to JavaFX. And to add it, we do root dot get children dot add greeting. So it seems a bit cumbersome to add it, but on line 27, that's what we need to do anytime we're adding a control basically to our scene. That's the way it actually works. You need to use the root.getChildren and .add and whatever the name of the control is that we're actually adding. So we need to put that code in before the primary stage.show so that it's actually on the screen, and then when we run it, it should actually work. So if we run this now and have a look and see what's happened, you can see we've now got welcome to JavaFX showing within the window itself. So that's good that that's been added for us automatically. So closing that down, let's change this a little bit. Let's actually change the color. So to do that, we're going to come down here and type greeting. We'll do that just after the definition, the declaration on 26. So it'll be greeting.setTextFill. And we're going to set that to color. Now, noticing when it's asking us which import, we want to make sure each time you're doing this that you're actually importing the right one. JavaFX.scene.paint is the right package in this case. So I'm going to click on that, dot, and we're going to let's use green for this. Green, like so. We should be able to run that again and see the text in green. You can see that there, just focusing it up, you can see that that's now in green, so that's working, that's good. Okay, so let's do something else now. Let's actually change the font and make it bold. And to do this, we need to call the set font method, and then we set the font, we're going to set the font to Times New Roman as well. So how do we do that? Well, we come down here to line 28, just after the set fill, I'm going to type greeting dot set font. So we're going to change the font. We're going to set that to font. So we're using a static method, font.font. And again, you can see on the screen there, java.fx.scene. So again, you're wanting to be making sure your imports are from JavaFX, because you can see there's lots of different choices there. So JavaFX font.font and Times New Roman is the name of the font we're going to be using. And this is case sensitive, so make sure you type it exactly as you see it. And we said we're going to do it in bold. So to do it in bold, we're going to type font weight dot, and you saw there was a dot bold showing on the screen there, so I'm going to select that. Again, making sure that JavaFX.scene is selected. I'm just trying to get you into the habit of making sure your imports are using JavaFX all the time. So we specified bold, and we also want to change the font size. Let's change that to 70. So that's an additional parameter. So 70, like so. And once we do that, we should be able to run that again. So we're going to run that. And you can see that's now much larger, and we could expand this out and have a nice screen there, as you can see on the middle there in green, and it's now taking up a lot more space because it's now made much larger because we've used larger fonts. So that's how to go about doing some coding within the actual Java code itself instead of using the FXml file. So I'm going to close that down. But let's actually have a look at how to make the same changes using FXml. So what we're going to do is firstly uncomment the FXml loader.load again, and then we're going to comment all the other lines that we actually introduced. So I'm going to come back down to here first and comment out all these lines. I need to do it in two parts. So I need to comment out that first part first, and then down here, I need to do those as well, and the add as well. And just to make it a little bit easier to read, I'm going to come up here and paste that at the top there. And let's put this code down here as well, just so that it's actually separate and it's not going to confuse us. So basically all that code there on lines 26 through 34 was the code that we added manually. And I'm now going to undelete or remove the comments to make this valid. So we're now using the FXml file again. And just to confirm we'll run this, we should have our basic window showing again. Our basic windows again, and it is showing hello JavaFX, and that's because we still have made the code change on line 21 for the title. But let's now go into the FXml file and make the same changes we made in code, but using the FXml file. But obviously the welcome wasn't there anymore because of course we deleted that code. So in the sample.fxml, let's make the same change, and to do that we leave the first bit in the grid pane, but within the grid pane we come to the end here and we actually add our label. So in there we can type label. We're going to start with text. So text equals welcome to JavaFX, like so. And notice how it's automatically added that other label for us. And we're going to the ending label for us to close it off, and we'll leave that in there now. So if we run it again, we should now see our greeting again. Welcome to JavaFX is showing on the screen again. So that's good. You can see that's working now. So let's now set the font and text color and size as well, and to do that we need to put that within the label section. So we're going to start out by typing font like so, and press enter, and it then adds the closing section automatically, and within there we need to type font, and notice how it did the import for us. You saw that change, and then it's going to be name equals Times New Roman, case sensitive again, so make sure you get that right. Size equals 70, so like so, and then font weight equals bold. But you'll see here that font weight, the font weight property doesn't exist, so this is one case where the FXml differs from the way we do it in code. So what we're going to do is delete the font weight property. I'll show you the alternate way of doing it, or the way to do it in the FXml code. You don't do it like that. Instead what we do is we come back to the font name, and we change the font name to font Times New Roman space bold. We do it like that. So the font weight itself is specified as part of the font name when you're using the FXml. I guess it's not too surprising, and the reason I say that is because when presenting font choices, some programs list the fonts this way. You may have seen that in Microsoft Word for argument's sake. But that said, it's a little unexpected, which is the reason I wanted to show you that and how things can differ sometimes when you're comparing the code way to do it versus the FXml way. And lastly, let's also set the color. So we've actually defined the font, but we want to change the color of the label. So how do we do that? Well, that's done in the label section. So we come down here to after the end of our message, and we put text fill equals, and then we set that to green. And notice that helpfully IntelliJ is actually showing you the code and the actual colors it's going to use. So I'm going to press enter for that one. And you may have also noticed it's showing you the hex codes on the right hand side, which was pretty cool as well. So when we run that now, we should see something very similar to what we had before. And again, we've got our welcome. We can expand it out. And there's the same thing we've got using the FXml file than what we did earlier in the video in Java code. Now, interestingly enough, when we define a UI control using FXml, we can still change its property in code. And in fact, that's often what you'll probably want to do. So for example, we might want to enable or disable buttons in response to a user action. Now we're going to cover how to work with controls defined in the FXml in a later lecture, just to let you know. So as you've seen, we can create the UI by creating the UI controls through code and setting their properties, and then adding them to the appropriate parents, or of course we can do it through FXml. Now for the rest of the JavaFX lectures, we're going to focus on the FXml route. The FXml forces us to separate our UI from our business logic and data, and it's considered best practice to define the UI through FXml as much as possible, and for that reason we're going to be doing that in this section. Now an exception to that would be the stage that the JavaFX runtime constructs for us and passes to the start method. We have to work with it in code, that first part. Now another good reason for defining UI controls in FXml rather than through code is if we decide that we want to show how a UI control initially looks, we don't have to touch a line of Java code, and that's pretty cool. So when we added the greeting to the window and changed the color and font of the label using FXml, we didn't have to touch the main Java file. And one of the strengths of JavaFX is that we can change how an application looks without actually changing a line of Java code, which is something we couldn't do previously with Swing, which was the previous GUI tool that Java used to use. So defining the UI using FXml is also similar to how UIs are coded in other types of applications, like Android, which you may have seen if you've taken my Android course, but also for Windows as well. The concepts are the same, and so understanding and using FXml for our JavaFX applications will give us a head start when it comes to learning how to code other types of applications. But I wanted to show you that you can create UI components using code, but with that said, we're going to stick with FXml whenever possible from now on for the reasons I've outlined earlier, because it's really best practice. Okay, so that's been a really brief introduction to JavaFX. So in the next video, we're going to start taking a look at the JavaFX layouts. I'll see you in that next video.